Hi, and welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. There is an invaluable treasure trove of wisdom that we as artists and writers can gain from contemporary seasoned scribes and wordsmiths who are currently shaping the literary landscape. In a world obsessed with innovation and the cult of the new latest and greatest, it's easy to forget that learning from those who have already walked the many arduous miles before us can be just as crucial for our growth and development. Think about it just for a moment. The great writers of our time, the ones who are leaving an indelible mark on literature and culture, they aren't just blessed with talent. They are shaped by experiences, by the countless hours they've spent laboring over their craft, by the struggles and triumphs that life throws their way. They have honed their skills through years of dedication and hard work. And if we listen, we'll realize they're generously leaving us with a wealth of insights that we can tap into right now. When we immerse ourselves in the works and wisdom of seasoned writers, we're not just reading stories or poems. We're engaging in a dialogue with the accumulated knowledge of those who are actively navigating the challenges and opportunities of today's literary world. Today's guest is Anne Lee Parrish. She's an award-winning author and poet who has a number of books to her name, and she's joining us today to share her experience in the world of writing, publishing, and even sharing her work and all the dedication it takes to make the dream of becoming a published author a reality. And I'm so excited to get to welcome her to the show today. So welcome, Anne.
I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you so much. So, you definitely have a leg up when it comes to writing and publishing in this conversation because I'm relatively new to it. Just in the last couple of years, literally, I think 2 years is where we are as far as my publishing and writing experience as an author has is concerned. So, and I am all about it. But first, before you drop that wisdom on us, like tell us a little bit about yourself, when you started writing, and what led you to start wanting to publish your work.
Well, that's a very big question, so I'm going to try to give you a big answer, but let's get started with that. I wanted to write as a child. I think many people do.
Mhm.
That kind of got lost as I went along and the years went by. I had other interests, pursued other things, different career paths. Long story short, it was when I was about 27 years old. I was through college, I was through graduate school, and I had been working for a brief time as an economics consultant, which was consistent with what I had majored in college, which was economics, and then I got a master's in business administration. So all of that made perfect sense, but it was not what I wanted to do. I had always had this artistic urge. I didn't feel that that was something that the world was going to help me pursue very much. But I just took the bull by the horns, as it were, a dreadful cliche, but nonetheless. And at 27, I decided I'm going to try to learn how to write short fiction. That was the area of emphasis. Novels came much, much later, almost 20 years later, to be honest. So it was 1985. I'm 27 years old at this point, and I began to write short stories. I did not write them very well. In fact, I think I wrote them rather poorly, but I was very determined to improve what I was doing.
Mm.
I was extremely lucky in one regard. My father, then still living, was a professor at Cornell University, where many years before, one of his students, and a man with whom he had remained in touch after this fellow graduated, went on to become the fiction editor at the Atlantic Monthly, and his name was Mike Curtis. And my dad approached Mike, his old buddy, and said, "Hey, my daughter is sort of getting her feet under her as a writer. She's trying to learn how to write. She's not taking any coursework. She's not doing any workshops, but she is working awfully hard on her own. How would you feel if she were to send you something in the mail? Would you be willing to give it a look, give her some ideas?" And he said, "Sure, I'm happy to do that." So his generosity, his largesse with his time, basically ended up being an 8-year correspondence between
Wow.
him and me. I sent him everything I wrote. And he was very patient, and it must have been at times really boring for him because I got stuck in a groove and I didn't get out of that groove for a long time, an artistic groove. I was kind of
Mm-hmm.
churning out the same characters in the same situation, wasn't branching out, wasn't particularly innovative, but I learned an enormous amount from him. So finally, I reached a terrible point of frustration where I had been trying to publish. I was submitting my stories. I was getting nice little handwritten rejection notes. This was long before people put manuscripts in an envelope and provided return postage. Now everything's online. This was back in the days when you would haul everything down to the post office and spend your money and do that. But I would get little handwritten notes back saying, we liked this, we didn't like this. So I began to get some kind of connection going with various editors of the small academic presses, the Missouri Review, New England Review, those kinds of places. But I was very, very frustrated. I just wasn't getting anywhere. And interrupt me if I'm going on and on, but I'm just going to continue.
You're golden. Keep going.
I remember my mother said to me, why don't you write a story about your crazy family? And I thought, So I wrote, and it wasn't a particularly funny story. It was a story about the time when my parents divorced, which in real life happened when I was 10, but for the purposes of this particular piece of short fiction, I made myself a little older. I was the narrator of the story. I didn't want to be a 10-year-old narrator. I made myself 15 years old. So I wrote this short story called The Painful Shade of Blue. And as with all those that came before, I sent it to Mike Curtis off in Boston, that's where The Atlantic was published. And he read it and he was complimentary and he said, why don't you send this to a man I know at the Virginia Quarterly Review? The editor at that time was a gentleman named Stage, spelled Staige, which I think is wonderful. Stage Blackford, very Southern name. And I sent it to this guy and I waited. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and months went by. And I wrote a letter, and I didn't get an answer, and months went by. So I called the editorial office, and the secretary answered and said, well, I have to be honest, he doesn't like to be pestered by authors who are waiting for an answer. I thought, okay, fine, whatever. What I'm reading here is he didn't like it. He doesn't want to tell me. He lost the manuscript because at this point I had been through the ringer. I had really had all kinds of experiences from editors, and some were very good about getting back to you. Others kind of let you fall through the cracks and just forgot about you. And what today the kids call ghosting. Well, and then it was just, they didn't get back to you. So more months go by, more time goes by, and I got this letter typewritten. He typed it himself on, an old whatever. And he said, I'm terribly sorry. I took so long to answer you. This manuscript was assigned to one of my readers, and the reader had to take a summer job to make ends meet. He was working construction, and so he was busy. And I thought, oh my goodness, what's he trying to tell me? That this manuscript ended up under a pile of sawdust. Somebody threw their hammer down on it. What was going on? And I thought, this is the most apologetic, most long-winded rejection letter I have ever read. But he's an old Southern gentleman of the old school, so I'll just go with it. I kept reading. Finally, we get down to the final paragraph, and he says, I would therefore be pleased to publish this story. And I thought, wow, that only took me 9 years submitting to get published. But yeah, that's how it began. And that story came out in the autumn 1995 issue of the Virginia Quarterly Review. And
that's fantastic.
And I learned later that the well-known author Anne Beattie also had her start in the Virginia Quarterly Review. Her first story was published there. So there you go.
I love that. And what I really love is that you kept trying. It didn't stop you. And you had, you just were constantly learning and making yourself better at your craft and that kind of thing. And I think it's a testament, it goes to show you that if you will put in the work, it pays for itself in the long run. But so many of us get discouraged there at the beginning. And, those 99 rejection letters, it's like, I don't think I can have 100 rejection letters under my belt. And yet, I was like, glutton for punishment. Let's try that again. But finally, I don't know how different it is now as it was then, because like I said, I'm pretty new to this world of writing and publishing, but I don't know, was it as easy? Could you have easily turned around and been like, I'm just going to publish this on my own? Or, was it something that, yeah.
No, that was not done. People didn't even have blogs then. Now, if you have a blog, you can put your own story on your blog. Now, let me just say for people who are not as well acquainted with the ins and outs of the publishing world as I am, certainly in short stories, a lot of places today, if you have a short story or a poem or whatever, and you want someone else to publish it for you, in their guidelines, they will often say no previously published work, including on your own personal blog. So you have to be a little bit careful about that, because sometimes people don't want to, they want to be the first to do it. And most places will not want you to in essence, consider reprinting what someone else has published, although there are some places that will do that. It depends on what they're looking to do in their publication. But yeah, no, self-publishing in the late 80s and early 90s, no, that just wasn't out there.
Yeah, and do you think if it had been an option, do you think you would have kept pushing through the process to find someone to pick up your work? Or do you think you ever would have taken the bull by the horns again and just been like, hey, I'm going to do this myself?
No, I wanted somebody else to validate what I was doing. I think I would have continued until I found somebody else to do it for me.
Yeah, and there are so many. I mean, I've had so many conversations with authors of all kinds that, whether they are self-published, vanity published, which, I have my own opinion about that one, but trad published or hybrid published, we all come at it from such different places where what works best for you, what works best with your personality, what you need to have that validation. And so I thought I would ask, because for me, being able to say, I did this myself and I had I don't need somebody else to tell me. I need to see myself do it in order to know that I've been successful, which is so funny that we're all so different. But we all have the same goal, and that's to be a published author.
Absolutely. And to have people read you.
Yeah. So you have written poetry and novels and short stories, right?
Yes.
So you've done all of the above. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, I love them all. I really, really do. And it's funny because I came to all of them at different times in my life. So that's been interesting too.
So you started with short stories. Where did the poetry and novels come into play?
Much, much later. I did not write a novel until 2013. Nice. So I had been writing at that point for a long, long time. I can't do the math. Almost 30 years at that point. Yeah. And it had been suggested to me along the way. People who were familiar with my, personally, not editors were not making the suggestions. People I knew, writing colleagues would say, "Are you ever going to write a novel? Why don't you write a novel?" And I always thought, I just can't see myself doing it. It seems like an enormously daunting task. I don't think I could manage all the details and keeping all the threads together, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was fine for a while. I was perfectly happy with that concept for a while. I was still very much enjoying short fiction. But then, there's always a but then in any career. I got to a point where I thought, this particular story that I've written, I could spend more time with this cast of characters. I need more room Jerome. My stories were always around 5,000 words at the most. And I thought, I need more room. I want to spend more time and not be worried about word count and page length. I was very conditioned, again, by complying with submission guidelines. We don't want anything over 25 pages. We don't want anything over 5,000 words. So I just thought, I need more room. And so then I wrote a novel. And I went with a place called She Writes Press, who had brought out my second short story collection in 2013. And because I had published with them once, I thought, well, I will go back. And then that will say, because they will basically, they will help you get your novel to a point, or your manuscript to a point where it's ready to be published. My work was pretty ready. I'm happy to say at the time that I offered it to them, but I knew that they would accept that. I mean, well, I said, would you look at this? And then the publisher said, yeah, we'd be happy to bring that out. So I did that. And having done one, I just did more. I didn't publish with them again, but I went on to publish with another press, Black Rose Writing, in 2017. The year before, I came across Unsolicited Press for a short story collection, and I have been with them ever since. I've been with them for 7 years. So they now publish everything I write.
When you sit down to write in your novels, because that's something that it's very addictive, by the way. Like I get involved with my characters so intimately that I'm just like, hey, we're friends, we're hanging out today. And so do you ever struggle to like flip between, if you're like, oh, I should wax poetic today, or do you just have to be inspired to sit down and write a poem or anything like that?
Each of these things comes out of a different creative and artistic part of me. So they tend not to bleed into each other too much. I am able to really sort of compartmentalize what I'm doing work-wise. Interestingly, however, I find that there is some overlap in that I have to make a conscious decision. Is such and such an idea going to become ultimately a poem, or is it going to become a very, very short story? So those two forms, what I would refer to as flash fiction and poetry, do tend to sort of live in the same house. They're very close next door neighbors. But a novel is a completely different animal. I'm never confused, or I'm never torn between, am I going to work on poetry today or work on a novel? They are completely different. I will have the urge in the course of one work day to say, okay, I'm going to work on my poetry manuscript now. And now I'm going to stop this and I'm going to look at my novel now. Okay, now I'm going to stop that. And then I'm going to go and look at some short fiction now. So as I say, at the risk of repeating, I am able to kind of jump between or among those three forms fairly well, I think.
Wow. See, that's impressive, because I can't. Like if I'm going to focus on, well, and I guess for me, I don't write poetry so much as I've been working on song lyrics, and which is a form of poetry, right? Like I don't do the music part, but like the lyrics themselves, because it goes along with the novels that I'm working on. They're country music artists, and so they go together. But I cannot work on them at the same time. It has to be a totally separate day, because I will be in such like character development and plot moving and that kind of thing, that if I try to switch over and write lyrics, it's like, no, that's not quite, there's no rhythm there. I can't free form. Like there's no freestyle there.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I love hearing how different people process their work and that kind of thing. It's just, again, it goes back to how, we are all the same, but we are all so different, which is why it's so important to sit down and have these conversations so that we can learn, why isn't this working for me? Well, maybe you haven't tried the way that works for you and you're trying to be somebody you're not, or try to do it somebody else's way. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It takes a long time to figure out what you're comfortable with doing and what your work style is, what your work rhythm is. And there is no correct way to do any of this.
Yeah.
There just isn't. You just have to get it done.
Right. And that's the other thing, like just because you're frustrated and you're saying, hey, my process isn't working. Well, because it's probably not the right process. Try something different, but whatever you do, don't stop trying.
Absolutely.
Oh, Okay, so you have a novel coming out, or your most recent work is a novel that you've written called A Summer Morning, and then you have another one coming out in July. Is it also a novel, or is it a different work altogether?
It's a novel in July.
Okay, and are they related to one another?
They're not, no, no, these two are not. They do not have the same character groups at all. No.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's not part of a series. How many books can you write in a year and release in a year?
As many as they'll let me. It wasn't in a calendar year, but between November of 2020 and October of 2021, I brought out three titles. I brought out a short story collection, a novel, and my debut poetry collection. I didn't write them. I did not write them in that 12-month period, but the publication dates fell within that 12-month period. I am probably bringing out either two, well, this year is one title, calendar year 2023 is one title, consisting of the novel that just published on the 3rd of this month. That's A Summer Morning. Next year, there will be two titles. The novel that you just mentioned in July of 2024, followed by a volume of poetry in December of 2024. In 2025, we're back to having one title come out. That will be a novel called A Broken Window. And then in 2026, and that's as far as my personal timeline goes at this point, or for what I've signed contracts for, I will again have two titles coming out in 2026. Those will be a short story collection and another book of poetry.
Oh, I love that. And my brain is constantly working on something new. And so when I look at it, I'm going, man, I have work that could take me well into the future, but I can't wait that long. I'm like, I want it out right now.
There you
And
go.
so I have to kind of, yeah,
well, that's
I'm a little
always
impatient.
isn't it? That's always the frustration. In publishing, there is a very long lead time. These 2026 titles that I just mentioned, I am working now on something that will not come out for 3 years. I'm writing it now. I have to deliver that to my publisher this coming summer, but it will then be 2+ years before it comes out. That's just the way it is.
Does that ever make you anxious? Does that ever make you anxious? Because, oh yeah, it would make me very anxious. I'd be like, wait, should I change something? Wait, it's too late.
I've already started on that. I'm always changing things. I drive her nuts. I do. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's at what point does she cut you off and say no more changes? Like how close to that?
Probably about 3 hours before she is scheduled to send the file to the printer. And that has happened. That has happened.
Oh, that's fantastic. You're probably her favorite.
No.
Oh, that's so funny. So with all of these works, past and present and future, let's talk about marketing that volume of work, because I have two books that I have released. I have one that comes out in February, and that is probably the one part that overwhelms me more than anything, is sharing my work and just getting it out there for people to know about. So please share your wisdom and insight when it comes to that.
For me, wisdom and insight are fairly easy because I work with a publicity firm, and they will handle pretty much all of that for me. I work with a marvelous place that happens, and this is not why I chose them, but they happen to be in the same city, Portland, Oregon, where my publisher is, and the publicity firm is Mindbuck Media. Mindbuck Media. I kind of just turn it all over to them. They have an amazing team. They have a social media person who manages my Twitter posts, my Instagram posts. She's very active. So I just kind of say, here you go, let you guys handle it. For people who find that a little bit prohibitive in terms of cost, you have to work really hard. I mean, I don't have any good answers. To this day, it remains a fairly deep mystery to me. What is the best way to make people aware of your work? If you have a newsletter, if you are a member in your day job of a professional career, tell all those people what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Tell your golf club, tell your daughter's Girl Scout club, tell everybody that you've got this book coming out. Go to your local bookstore where you live, tell them you've got a book coming out. That's a little bit more of a challenge for self-published authors. Sometimes bookstores don't want, and I don't know why, don't want to represent titles that are not distributed by Ingram, which is the independent press distributor, the main one nationally. I don't know why, but you can go to them and say, would you be willing to stock some of my copies of my book? Would you put me on your events calendar to do a reading? The thing to keep in mind is that if you do want to set up those kinds of things and solicit people to write reviews for you, you need to be doing that 5 to 6 months before your book comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a planning question too. Don't say, oh, my book comes out on Tuesday. I think I'll go down to my bookstore, because their events calendar fill up, and typically they want to be promoting the new release. Again, that's silly. It's sort of the fantasy of American marketing. You got to do what's new. I think books have a long tail. I'm still selling copies of a book that I published in 2013, 10 years.
Yeah.
So, I don't think there's any rush, but a lot of people from the commercial standpoint look at it that way. But long story short, again, I don't have any great wisdom on how you get people aware of your book. Your name has to be in a lot of places, and this is what the publicists will do. Podcasts. I'm here with you today because my publicist, I think, reached out to you. Writing articles that you can get placed, all kinds of things, just to get your name out there.
I agree. And I think that's something that, especially coming at it from a self-published perspective, is that you have to do the work. Once you've written that book, you cannot expect it to just go set itself on a shelf somewhere and then jump in somebody's hands. Yeah, exactly. And so you have to do the work, and that's going to look very differently. It's going to look very differently from someone who has, a publicity company behind them and that kind of thing. It doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means that you have committed to do the work, or you're going to have wasted a whole lot of time and effort.
It's very challenging. It's very hard to get people to pay attention to your book. A lot of books are published, and the average reader, if there is such a thing, but people do not know how to distinguish among titles, and oftentimes they'll just wander into their local bookstore and they will be met by the collection that is being curated by the manager or whomever. So those relationships are worth cultivating. Go to where your book's going to get sold and talk to those people.
Absolutely. And make connections, just like you said, tell everybody about it. I think sometimes, I know for me, somebody will be like, oh, you wrote a book? And I'm like, yeah, I wrote a book. It's fantastic. I love it. And they're like, what's it about? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I freeze on the spot and I'm like, I cannot tell you. I do know that it's a great book. You should read it. And so, how would you expect, or how would you help somebody get past that? Since you've done it for a while, you've talked about your work for several years longer than I have, just because, I haven't been doing this long. How would you encourage me specifically to get over not being able to talk about my work?
Oh, I would just say go for it. Be proud of yourself and talk about it. This is your career. Be willing to tell people about your work. Write some articles about what your personal artistic journey has been. Put those on your blog. See if you can get anybody else interested. If you've got colleagues who are also writers and they have blogs, start getting on their blogs, agree to represent each other, or to cross post, to cross review, post your reviews. The typical places to post your reviews are Amazon and Goodreads. Of course, they're the same company because Amazon bought Goodreads. Talk about vertical integration. But there are lots of places where you could post reviews and do that. Another thing that writers have to be willing to do, and for some it is a big hurdle, you, ideally speaking, have to be willing, if not completely comfortable with, reading your work in front of people. You have to be willing to get in front of a group of people. If a bookstore is going to host you for a reading, that's what you have to do. Now, sometimes 3 people show up to your reading, and it's your gardener, your mother-in-law, and your cousin, and whatever. But you have to get up at the podium, and you got to stand there, and you got to read. and
it's so true.
And that can be nerve-wracking. But that's another thing you have to do. You have to put the author hat away. Your private time is done. We work by ourselves, we work alone. But then when the book is out, you have to go out into the world with it. You have to bring it with you, and you've got to get people to pay attention to it and be willing to talk to people.
Absolutely. And you just never know, how many people you're going to make connections with that just change your life altogether. I had one lady, she read my second book, and there's a character in there who he's the main character, and then his wife has a child, and the main character had lost his brother to suicide, when they were children, and they named the baby after his brother. And so when this woman read my book, she said, "You just don't understand, like, that happened to me. I lost my brother to suicide, and I named my son after him, and it was just so happened the same name that I had chosen for the baby in the book." And she was like, "You just..."
My goodness, what a coincidence.
I know, and I just got chills. I get chills every time I think about it. And she was just like, it meant something to me that you talked about this, that this is a real thing, that this kind of thing happens. It's grief. We process it, and then we embrace it and kind of move on from there. And so just to be able to have those kinds of conversation, you just never know. So you have to be willing to talk about your work, even if it makes you feel really awkward and uncomfortable sometimes.
Yes, and we do have to sort of drop barriers, and it's hard to do that.
For sure. So speaking of talking about work, let's talk about what is your upcoming novel and all the novels in the past, if you want to talk about those. What is your work about? What's the theme of them, or anything?
Oh, I would say it's mostly about relationships between men and women, and family relationships. Not entirely, not exclusively, but for the most part. And that goes all the way back to my short fiction. In October of 2012, when I brought out a linked collection of short stories all about one family, that was kind of when I gave the world my Dugan family, Dugan, and they live in a fictionalized town in upstate New York, modeled on the town I grew up in to the age of 14, called Dunston, New York. And the novel that came out earlier in October, A Summer Morning, does once again present this cast of characters. It's a family of 5 adult children, and this novel is about the second eldest, Timothy Dugan, and he's 34 years old. He is really kind of a mess. His parents are divorced. His father had a terrible drinking problem, which sadly Timothy has inherited. His mother married a much wealthier man, and that gentleman died in a freak accident that left her very well off. So Timothy is financially privileged, personally undisciplined, and these are a dire combination, as we know. He has a marvelous, marvelous girlfriend who is a poet. She's a college student. She's a little bit older. She's trying to get her undergraduate degree. She too is in her early 30s, and the initial point of conflict between the two of them, not to give too much away, she would like to start a family, and he has no interest in that because he's obviously not nearly mature enough to even consider what it would be like to be a parent and to put his own issues aside. So this novel takes place over the course of one summer, and it's one of the sadder, more somber toned works I've done. It's not entirely without humor. It's not a tearjerker, but I'll be honest, it's a sad story because you watch this young man kind of losing his grip. He doesn't become insane, not like that. Not like the family has to come together and say, okay, we really need to commit you for 48 hours. Not that. He's losing touch with the people around him. He just is not seeing the world the way they're seeing it. He's not reviewing his behavior the way he sees it. He is the classic unreliable narrator. So it's
Mm.
subtle, but I like to think it's poignant, and it is sad. And the question I hope that the reader is always asking herself as she's going along is this couple going to hang together? Are they going to make
Mm.
it? Is he going to change, or is it all going to fall apart? That's what it's about. So you have to be a reader who is invested in relationships. You know, they have to be important to you. If you want to read an action story, a crime story, a whodunit, that's not what this book is. This book is not for you. Um, but I think I'm hoping there is a good pool of readers who are going to want to know, are they going to make it as a couple? And you
Mm.
have to find out.
That's what I live for in a story. I'm like, are they going to make it? And like, do you ever get so invested in your characters that you just think, um, you cry when something happens to them, or when they're going? Do you have like visceral reactions to your own characters that you've created?
Oh, I used to, but I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And I not to say that I've become hardened in any way, but I'm not as sentimental, not nearly as sentimental as I used to be 20, 30 years ago. Um, so I acknowledge not what I think is a lovely passage or a clarifying moment. Someone has an epiphany, and I am touched by it, but I'm not as deeply touched as I was.
Okay, so there's hope for me yet, because I tell you what,
Oh, so totally.
because that first book, I had a character, he didn't make it, and I cried every time I read it, even after publication. I was just like,
There you
I'm
go.
so sorry, and so I'm thinking, I can't do that every time. It's mentally not healthy. But I do love a good love story. And even if it doesn't have a happily ever after, which, listen, I thrive on happily ever afters. I want everybody to have them, but that's not always real life. So even if it's not an HEA, I'm just like, as long as there's growth, if there's growth in the end, I don't handle well when it just kind of dies, when it just stops. It's like, and you don't know what happens. But as long as everybody has learned something, or somebody has learned something, I feel okay about it. I have to be prepared for it. Yeah.
For sure.
I don't know that you can be prepared for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just hit you upside the head with it. Okay. So I have a question that I posed the other day on my TikTok channel, and I'd love to get your take on it, because it's one of those questions that, and I haven't asked anybody else because I literally it was the end of last week, and I got a lot of mixed answers back about this. But the question was, if I read your book as an author, do you want me to actually leave a review on your work? And I always leave a star rating, even, as anonymously as possible, even sometimes if it's not a good star rating, but I always leave a star rating. But as an author, it feels weird for me. I'm all about collaboration and supporting each other, but leaving a review for another author feels icky almost. Like, would you want another author to leave a review on your work, even if they didn't like it?
That's an interesting question, and that's going to allow me, if you will, to talk a little bit about reviews in general.
Yes.
A lot of people don't know how to think critically about a book or about anything they read, and what they tend, therefore, to respond to is, did I like the book? Did I like the characters? That's not a review. A book is not a popularity contest. What you have to do is ask yourself, what's the author trying to tell me? And is the way that she's telling this story working, or is it not working? Is she telling me something important, or is it not an important message? Is she handling it subtly, or is she beating me over the head with it? Those are the kinds of questions that you have to ask yourself. So whether that reviewer is an author or someone who's not an author, to me, that's not as important as, are you thinking about the book critically and putting we all have a tendency to say, well, I just didn't like this book. Okay, why didn't you like it? Did you not like it because the pacing was poor? Did you not like it because you found it dragged? I've had people read this book that just came out and said, I was so frustrated. I just wanted these characters to be able to speak honestly to each other. Okay, they can't. They are stuck in a situation where they they don't trust each other as much as they trusted one another when they got together.
Mhm.
They've put up their defenses. They don't know what to do about that. That's the whole point. So this particular reviewer gave me 3 stars out of 5 because she was frustrated.
Mm.
Well, I didn't appreciate that. Again, I've been around the block. I didn't flip
Right.
my wig or anything like that. But I wish that she had said, okay, I do understand what this author is doing. She's showing us these people who are trapped, and she's portraying this trap well. It's not a good place to be, but this is where they are. So to answer your question, yeah, I say, give a review, say how the book struck you, where did it succeed for you and where did it fail for you, but not because you didn't like the character.
And I totally get that. And I am so bad when it even comes to writing reviews in the first place, because I'm what I call a vibe reader. Like, when I read a book, if it doesn't give me feelings of some kind, like I want to feel something when I read it, whether I feel angry or frustrated or upset with the story, with the characters, with what's happening, not with, how the book is written or the grammar or anything like that. Now, poorly edited work, I will put down faster than anything else, because it keeps me from getting into the story, because my eyes want to critically, evaluate everything that I'm looking at and say, oh, that's so bad. And so I won't read poorly edited work just because I can't. But if
I don't blame you.
Yeah, it's hard. And oh my goodness, I had one, bless his heart. He sent me a book and he was like, hey, will you be an ARC reader for me? And I was like, sure. And so he sent it. And I got 3 pages in and my red pen had marked, his pages were bleeding. And I said, hey, I think you need to take this off the market for right now and work a little bit on it, because I couldn't.
On the editing, yeah.
And I was not trying to be rude. I was just, I want you to be the best you can be. And this is going to get you some 1-star reviews. Some people will read it and not think anything of it. But anyway, so I'm a vibe reader. When I read a good book, if it doesn't give me a good vibe, like I don't want to necessarily leave a review, only because I need some time to process it. And then once I've processed it, I'm like, well, I can tell you how I felt about it. And so I'm so bad at it. It's not even funny how bad at it I am. And it may be because I read too many books at a time. Like I have multiple books going at a time. And so I'm probably not the best person to ask for a review, but I always leave stars, always, because I think, I'll take a good 5-star even without words. You know what I mean? I'm all about it.
Absolutely.
But I'm with you. I agree completely that I think you have to really respect the story. And I had a reader who I didn't write her particularly favorite genre. And I'm like, then you probably shouldn't provide too much feedback, because it's not a genre you're going to enjoy in the first place. Don't.
And that's true. Yeah. And the thing is, readers bring a whole set of expectations to a book.
Yes.
And if those expectations are not met, they find fault with the author.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe they shouldn't have been reading that book, as you just said.
Mm-hmm.
You're not the best reader for this book. So that's another thing too.
Yes. And so, as an author, remember, don't take it to heart either that your book is not meant for every reader. Like, even if they love romantic suspense, yours just may not have been the storyline for them. And that's okay.
Right.
Your friend down the road, who did read it, it was her cup of tea. And so, you just have to understand that it's not about you. It's about them most of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of the time. Okay. So we have gotten to the point of the show where I'm going to flip the script and I'm going to give you control of the show. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about, whether it's your work or authors or whatever, cats, dogs, whatever. Your turn.
Well, thank you. I don't know that I've got enormous pearls of wisdom to share, but there is one thing I definitely would like to touch on,
Okay.
and that is small press publishing.
Yeah.
What's called indie publishing, but that term indie is I've seen it defined as people who self-publish or who publish with a small press. Those two experiences are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a distinction that I want to draw people's attention to, and I want them to understand, if you are an author and you are trying to find out where you want to end up, or if you are a reader and you are trying to decide if it's important to you how the author you're looking for is published, you need to understand what these terms are. In our publishing world, you have mainstream conglomerate publishing. That's the big five publishers, primarily based in New York City, and they have many, many imprints. So there are many, many imprints that come out of this group of five. But those are the big publishers. You need almost always a literary agent as an author. You need to jump through that hoop first before any of the editors or readers at those big publishers will take a look at you. So if you are an author and you are deciding what you're going to do with your manuscript and you really want to get published by one of these big five commercial publishers, you need to begin by finding an agent. That is an enormous process in and of itself. That is very, very time consuming. You have to do your research. You have to look, when you've narrowed it down, what books has this agent recently inked a deal for? Is that book like yours in any way? These are going to be talking points when you write your query letter, when you are approaching these agents. So you need to have that information in hand before you start that entire process. If you don't want to do that, then you want to look at small independent presses. How do you find them? Excellent question. I found my publisher, Unsolicited Press, based in Portland, Oregon, through Poets and Writers magazine. Poets and Writers has an online presence, a very good website, and on that website they have an entire section devoted to small press publishing. And they will have a list, a alphabetical list, A to Z. And so at this particular time, it was, I believe, in the spring of 2016 or the winter of 2015, when I had a short story collection that I was shopping. I went to this list, and instead of starting at the A's, I started at the Z's. And that's how I came across them, because they were at the U. You know, they begin with the letter U, Unsolicited Press. So I sent to them, and they took a long time. They took a long time to get back to me, but they did, and I was thrilled. I would encourage authors to look to publish with small press publishers, and also for readers to really look at these people. How do you find these presses? Again, go to your local independent bookstore, not Barnes and Noble. Don't go there. Go into your local independent seller and say, I am interested in the small press publishing. I want to see who do you carry of the small presses? Who are the titles that you like? Point me in this direction. This is what I like to read. There's another marvelous website called bookshop.org. Also, IndieBound I think IndieBound is if you know the title already and you type that into their search bar, and that will tell you where you can go physically to find it or purchase online. Bookshop.org, I think, will recommend to you small press titles that might be of interest. So for me, this is a huge thing. I think the really interesting work is coming out of the small presses right now, because they can take chances. Of course, they want their books to sell 1,000 copies or more, but that doesn't typically happen. They don't have, in most cases, the marketing dollar to put behind it. So that means that for those authors, they're not going to see as many of their books sold. But at the same time, the benefit there is that they can take a chance, because they're not going to lose a ton of money on you. And I have spoken with people who colleagues who do publish with the bigger presses and I had one man say, I was told by my publisher that if my book didn't sell 2,500 copies, he wasn't going to bring out another title from me. So again, that financial imperative that the big publishers are up against means, A, that they're going to put the money in to sell those books. But again, that flip side, if those books don't sell, you're not going to be invited back. So all of this is to say, I think a lot of really good, valuable work is going on in small press publishing. Interesting titles, innovative forms. If you are really into literary fiction, that's where you're going to go. If you want, a big, thick, hardback mystery, go to your big press publishers. That your Dean Koontz, that kind of thing. Stephen King. But a lot of interesting work is getting done. My publisher, Unsolicited Press, has grown enormously in 7 years. They have a very respectable book catalog now, and they bring up interesting stuff. I say that not just because I publish it, but but so that would be the soapbox that I'm standing on today. I really think that's important.
I think it's a fantastic soapbox to get on, because one, there are some authors out there who they don't have the time or the resources to publish on their own. Self-publishing is not for everybody, and sometimes you need.
No, it's very hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And so unless you have the network and the resources, the time, the money, the energy to put into it, you might end up spinning your wheels and not making progress. Whereas I agree, I think a lot of really great work is coming from the smaller presses because you're not getting cookie cutter work, which I think is so unfortunate that, we are so bombarded by books that their covers all look the same, their words all look the same, their stories, it's a formula, it's formulaic, and there's nothing wrong with using a formula, but my goodness, let's add a little variety. When you're making a good cookie, sometimes you just need a little extra cinnamon in there to make it the best cookie. I don't understand why you would want your book to look like everybody else's and get lost in the noise. So yeah, I agree completely that small presses, that is where it's at.
Yeah, totally.
What's the process with Unsolicited Press and getting your work at least looked at by someone there?
I think that they have pretty much open submissions all the time, meaning that authors can send their manuscript in at any time. And so the thing that an author has to do wherever you're thinking about submitting directly, and one thing about the small press is they do not require an agent to look at your manuscript. So that's one thing. But you have to go to the website or wherever they post their writer's guidelines, and you have to see, do they have specific reading periods? Are there only certain times during the year where they are willing to have people that they're not already in a working relationship with send them a manuscript? I think Unsolicited will read year round. Nice. And then the guidelines will say to you, send us your manuscript. This is how we want it formatted. This is how long you should wait to expect a reply. This is what you do if so much time has gone by. That kind of thing. Now, I'm in a very different position with them because they have worked with me times. Basically, now I will approach my publisher and say, hey, I've got an idea for this book. What do you think? And she'll say, yeah, that sounds great. I'll send you a contract. We'll sign it before I've even started the book or something like that. But then, then we have an editorial schedule that is established and we follow that. Because there are steps along the way, and those steps very, very loosely are, I deliver the return, I deliver, in quotation marks, the complete manuscript. As I say, I'm terrible about fiddling with it up to the 11th hour, but there is that start point where I provide her the manuscript, then she sends it back with edits. There are 2 rounds of that. Then there is the proofreading. Then we have the book designer get on board and we talk about the cover concepts. Then there's the actual galley that comes out, and that's the way it's going to look in the book. That's the print layout. That's a whole other process. Then we print one paperback copy so that we actually can look at it. What is it like in the hand? Do we like the paper stock? Is the image translating okay? Because everything else up to this point has been on screen. Now we have the physical copy. And then we go through that. Then we pull the plug and the print file goes off and the print run gets run, and that's it. and then the publicists take over and we keep our fingers crossed and hope for great things.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that whole process, because it's intriguing. Like, we don't see that process on this side of things. So I appreciate you sharing that. And in the same vein, like, how much input do you have on the layout, on the cover design, that kind of thing? How much of the author's input is valued?
Great deal. A great deal.
Awesome.
I mean, the designer, Katie Eckhart, will say, give me a direction. And I'll give her direction, and she's phenomenal.
Mm.
Her work is stupendous. And she'll come back, and she typically will provide me with 3 options. Each will be a very different direction, and one usually will speak to me above the other 2, and then we'll focus on that one and make a few tweaks. I'll say, well, can we do this to the lettering? Can you do this with the font? Can you enlarge this part of the image? Can you sort of subordinate this part of the graphic? Those kinds of things. Back and forth on that, and then we settle on it, and then
Nice.
that's exciting.
That is exciting. I love that, and that you're not just handing over all of the blood, sweat, and tears that you've poured into it. You still have a hand in it. I think that's a lot of my fear of going in a direction like that, is losing any kind of say, because I feel like I want to be part of the whole creative process, start to finish, and I'm terrified to lose that, because that's what happens a lot of times when you do hand it over to a publishing house.
Well, any good publisher is going to work with you, and no publisher or book publisher or publication editor, for short stories and poems, no one should force you to accept an editorial change that you don't agree with. It should always be a back and forth. They should say, make this word change, and this is why I think you should, but they should never, ever demand it.
Nice.
So, you should never really be in a position where you feel like you're losing control of the process. They should be working with you hand in glove the whole way.
Yes, I love that. And that's a great red flag to look out for. Like, if this is what they are demanding, then that's probably not a safe place for you to take your work in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question about the process with unsolicited press, and if you can speak to it, great. If not, that's fine too. But do they ever take on authors who have already published a work? Because like you said earlier, a traditional press is probably not going to pick up a self-published author. Very unlikely going to happen. But if I had published a book, would they take it and look at it and be like, hey, we want to work with this and make it ours?
Boy, that's a good question, and I'm not 100% certain, but my gut tells me no, that they would not do that.
Yeah.
I think they want an original work that has not been brought out elsewhere. That's what my sixth sense is telling me.
And that's perfectly likely and perfectly fair as well, because like you said, they would have to rebrand and reprocess the whole thing just about. And so that probably is good to know for anybody out there. Just if you have a book in the works, and you want to take it, that's different. But if you've already put a book out there, it's probably not going to work out, because I have heard, and there was oh my goodness, it's one of the big romantasy authors. She was self-published, and she started on Wattpad, where it was like fan fiction basically that she was writing, and then she made it into a book and self-published, and then she got picked up by a traditional publisher, and I can't remember which one it was. I think Sarah J. Maas maybe. Anyway, so it can happen. It's just not likely to happen.
No, these things are not likely to happen.
That's like a 1 in a million chance. Okay, well, what else? Because I think that was a great soapbox, and more people should stand up on that soapbox and say it louder.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so just, I leave you with this. Independent publishing, small press publishing, really interesting stuff going on there.
For sure. Okay, and tell us how listeners can connect with you and your work, your website, social media, anything like that.
Go to anneleeparrish.com. That's my website. That should have links to my Twitter, or I guess it's X now, and Instagram. And I am available on both of those platforms, and I'm active on those platforms. I can be found on Twitter at Anne Lee Parrish, Instagram too. Okay. So you will find me.
Perfect. And I'll make sure all of that is in the show notes, so that it's as easy as clicking the button and it'll take you right where you need to go. All right. So now let's answer the big question. The big question that I ask everybody, what is one piece of advice or encouragement that you want listeners to walk away with if they hear nothing else today?
Writers, don't ever give up. If it's what you want to do, just keep doing. Learn how to do it better.
Yes.
Learn how to write better, but don't give up. and don't get discouraged. It's a very, very tough career. You get rejected much more than you get accepted. You get told no a lot more often than you get told yes. You have to get used to it. You just do. You have to find a way to live with that and to keep focusing on the art and doing the art better.
That is fantastic advice. And how much sweeter are those yeses when you actually get them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, oh, great. Thank you.
Just wait for your time and wait for your place. And when all that comes together and you hear that yes, oh my goodness, I can just imagine the angels will sing and rejoice.
Yeah, and then it's great to get the yes, but then you have to do the really hard work because if that's yeses for a book, just summon that entire process that I described just a few minutes ago. It's a lot of work.
Yes.
It's a lot of work to get a book out. It's a lot of going over and over and over and solving problems. And sometimes there are printing problems, and sometimes there are distribution problems, and sometimes, books sit in a warehouse and they don't get sent out to reviewers quickly enough. It's a lot to do. So
it is. But would you say it's worth it?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. I agree. And thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your time and your wisdom. I appreciate it personally so much. I know that the listeners will as well.
I'm glad we worked out our technological difficulties. It's always anybody's guess, what's going to work and is it going to fail today? But we made it through. I think we did great.
I think so too.